I think being a first-year private equity associate is like the hardest job because not only are you doing the grunt work of all the analysis, all the presentation, building, whatever, and the expectation is you know everything. Whatever the VPs know, you should know. Whatever the MDs, the partners know, you should know. And they will lean on you to ask, hey, what do you think about like this bullet point on page 58 of the QE? I'm like, my man, I haven't even gotten there. I will read that tonight at 2 a.m. in the morning.
All right, we're back with another episode of the Source Code Sessions, and today we've got Edwin Yun, who's pretty exciting to have this conversation because I think he's got a very interesting career into private equity, and then recently left it to pursue some entrepreneurial endeavors. So the focus today is really about that journey through recruiting, through investment banking, and into private equity, the skills you learn, and then learning to apply those in a setting outside of a fund. So Edwin, excited to connect today and learn more.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
No, well, I think to start, I'd love to at the very highest level, just talk about, how you ended up getting into finance, when that became a goal of yours, and how you kind of started down that path.
Yeah, and I guess for context for your audience,
Oh, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. So I currently run Road to Carry, which is a kind of digital media / education platform centered around private equity. So I've spent about 7-ish years across private equity, across 2 firms, and spent a couple of years earlier in my career. So say collectively about 9 years in banking and private equity. But going all the way back to kind of my personal story to get into how I got into finance, which is, I think, somewhat accidental. So growing up, I grew up in South Korea, moved to the US in middle school. Like my family had 0 ties to Wall Street. I had no idea what private equity investment banking was. My father was a small business owner. So naturally I was helping him out, and I thought, hey, one day I want to own a business. So when I got to college, I decided to study business. So I was at UNC Chapel Hill in their undergrad business program, and as a freshman, like I didn't really know what the difference was between accounting, finance, consulting, marketing, all the different paths, right? So I pretty much tried to explore everything. Went to all the clubs on site, all the events, and really my first foray into finance was just pure dumb luck. So I was working at this reception desk in this building that does events for alumni of the business school, specifically the business school alumni. And so sometimes I would just kind of chit chat with people that come through the doors, and these are typically people in their 40s and 50s. And I hit it off with this guy who was an asset manager. And I was like, oh, this is a really nice guy. Like, why don't I follow up? Maybe he'll be okay taking me out to coffee. And so we got coffee, and he was just telling me about his investment career. And that's when I kind of learned about finance as something that could be interesting to me. And happy to kind of go into more of this, but that ballooned into my freshman internship, which then kind of exposed me to the world of finance, private equity, so on and on and on. But really the initiation was that kind of personal connection with the random alumni that I had a conversation at that building.
That's awesome. And it's funny, right? Because I think so many people get to careers but in so many different ways, but this is one where a lot of people have that, it's almost like a doctor or a lawyer. They have that vision of, I want to go into this at an early age. So it's always interesting to hear that, people still stumble into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the generation following us, there's so many resources now, right? Like there's like Wall Street Oasis. Yeah, I started reading it when I got interested in finance, but you could even find some like high school students asking about like, hey, what's the best college to go into to get a top banking or private equity job, which I think is insane. But I think it just kind of goes to show, as we'll talk about later, competition, transparency in the industry which was kind of partly some of the reasons that kind of led me to explore other things.
Yeah, I think I get emails from high schoolers asking about, breaking into the industry or LinkedIn messages. So the competition has always been intense, but I think the knowledge of it has just increased that. And when you think about that freshman internship, because it all starts with that first internship where, if you don't get your sophomore internship, you're so far behind the eight ball. So can you just talk about, what that process was like, how you found it, how you got it, and then what made you decide to stick with it?
Yeah. So coming out of the coffee chat, I guess I was a bold college student. I just straight up asked him, "Hey, do you know anyone hiring for summer intern? I'm looking for one." And I guess that came off well to that particular gentleman. He asked around his network, and one of his former bosses, who ran the equity research desk at one of the kind of large multi-billion-dollar asset managers near campus. So they manage a ton of capital for UNC
Yep.
athletes, right? The guys and folks in the NBA, NFL, whatever. And so that's kind of how I got introduced to, I guess, the person that became my boss for my summer internship, my freshman summer. And look, I think, as much as I dressed it up as a finance internship, it was kind of half data science, half finance. So the core responsibilities that she wanted an intern for was she basically wanted someone to like organize all the data that was kind of assembled across different places and automate some stuff, blah, blah, blah. And basically her ask was, do you know how to code? I said, I do not, but I can learn. And specifically, she was interested in VBA, which is the coding behind Excel. So I said, I will learn it, and I will send you a project over the next month. And if you like that, like if you like what I sent you, you can hire me. So I basically bought a book on BVA and studied for a month and built up this Excel model that basically, if you put in a ticker, it will spit out a DCF. So that was what I built. And I sent it to my boss to be, and she was like, you know what, you're hired. You come on board. So basically, I mean, the bulk of the work that I was actually helping her with was more data science coding work. And by the way, I'm not a computer science major, so that was the peak of my kind of engineering skill set. But the rest of it, right, 25-30% of it was like me learning, right? So she would tell me, hey, we have an earnings call for XYZ names that we're covering. Go listen and send me notes. And following that, she may tell me, hey, like here's a name, go build a model. Here's like a precedent from a similar name. So like I did get the finance reps that I could use for future internships. But I think one of the advice that I give to younger students is you don't know anything, and so you can't go to a potential employer and say, hey, hire me for a finance role, and just I'm going to be learning, but really there's no value add for a freshman intern. So you have to think creatively about like, okay, what can you do that actually helps the employer, even if it's grunt work, comp sci, whatever that may be outside of the core finance work, but leverage that to get the role, and allocate some part of that internship as kind of a learning process for finance as a stepping stone to get to the next thing and the next thing.
Well, and I think that lesson is like universally applicable to the next stage you want to get to, right? Like you're always going to be a net drain for a while because you're not there yet, right? I think there's varying degrees of that. But when you're a freshman intern, right, what you really want is somebody that, one, you can see if they develop and you could, have an ongoing relationship with them for future internships or employment. But two, you can get them to a point where they can add value in some way within a reasonably quick fashion because you don't have them for very long. So like
Exactly.
that idea that, hey, I'm not going to ask for an internship. I'm going to build something so impressive that they at least have to consider me, right? And I think that approach of, how can I add value or show that I can add value without asking anything of them is always one of the most, motivating ways to get people to move.
Yeah, and I think it just kind of impresses people, and those people obviously have spent their entire careers in finance or whatever they're working in, and they're really looking to the younger generations to maybe help them with, I don't know, in these day and age, it could be AI, whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great, like, because there's a good chance as someone in the younger generation, you do have a skill or a skill set that can add value, but it might not always be completely obvious.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
in your case, it was the willingness to learn.
Willingness to learn. I've also learned from through that experience that I'm probably not a natural coder. So
Yeah.
I take that off the list of potential careers.
Well, now you have ChatGPT for that, right? Claude. But I guess when you think about that freshman internship to going into banking and private equity, because asset management is a kind of different route, right? Um, what exactly got you into that path, and when did that happen, and kind of how did it happen?
Yeah. So I think coming out of that freshman internship, there are a couple things I learned. One is I like the quantitative aspect of it. I wasn't cut out for a math major or comp sci major, but I was nerdy enough to go to a high school called like North Carolina School of Science and Math, which is just nerdy high school kids just interested
Yeah.
in math and science. So I wanted the quantitative aspect to what I do for the rest of my life. So finance provided that a little bit, um, and I think what I also realized is I think sitting behind computers, just analyzing 10Ks, whatever earnings calls. While it's intellectually stimulating, it wasn't enough. I wanted a little bit more kind of personal interaction, building with people aspect of it. So actually, coming out of the internship, I was more interested in consulting as a path. So my sophomore year, I focused a lot on finding a consulting internship, and I'll talk about this. This is my path to private equity. So in addition to all the big, MBBs, right, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, I applied to. I basically applied to anything that sounded remotely consulting-like on the career website. And one of them happened to be this microcap PE firm, and that was the offer that I got for that summer. Unfortunately, I got to McKinsey, and BCG is like Super Day, and they're like, "Hey, you're smart, but I think you should maybe spend another year and whatever, get older, be wiser, and come back." So I took the microcap private equity offer, which was kind of my foray into private equity in general.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, um, can you just talk about, I guess, yeah, then you went through that internship and you went into banking. What did you learn at that internship? And then how helpful was that internship in getting your first banking role? And, what do you think made you successful in that process?
Yeah. So I actually really enjoyed that internship. So it was the reason why I sounded consulting like was because half of the internship was portfolio operations and the other half was the investment role. So I had a capstone project for one of the portfolio companies, basically helping them figure out where to focus their energy. And then I also looked at a few kind of investment opportunities as an add-on for the portfolio company as well. It's a really relevant experience, but net, what I took away from that was I enjoy kind of the quantitative aspect of investing, but also just company building and really like what other opportunities are there where you are sitting in the same boardroom as CEOs and COOs, and yeah, sure, I'm not the one speaking, but I'm like sitting there absorbing everything and going back to my desk and trying to relate whatever project that I'm doing to that conversation that I heard in the boardroom, right? So it was really fascinating. So I really kind of fell in love with the idea of, oh, I think I want to do private equity full time. Like that sounds like something that would eventually allow me to go build a company, right? Um, and the reason why I went to investment banking was because when I got back to campus, the person hired me at the person who hired me at the microcap PE firm, I guess liked me and kind of wanted me to come back the following year and perhaps join them full time. But I kind of wanted to, like, I don't know, work at a big firm and go work in a big city, and kind of have all the experience. So when I asked around, like, hey, how do I get to, like, one of the top PE firms? And at least back then, there weren't any, I guess besides maybe Blackstone, any PE analyst roles out of school. So everyone just told me, hey, you got to go through investment banking and recruit to private equity from there. So I kind of set my eyes on private banking recruiting my junior summer, got the internship at Barclays, did the full time, and recruited to private equity.
And what was that getting that internship, right? Because that's a highly competitive internship to get. And I think one of the things when I discovered this world late in life, and one of the things that's fascinating to me is you have this kind of predetermined career path in many ways, where if you fall behind, it becomes exceptionally difficult to get back on, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's an element of it's such a competitive field, and that they look at it as like, why would we deviate from the path that we know works, even if we are missing some really smart people? Like, our funnel of really smart, talented people is so strong that we can afford to leave some out of it. But would be really curious to, like, how you think that experience was, how you would tell people to prepare for that, and if you think that will kind of be the go forward of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about my experience, and I think looking back, stars aligned in the sense that I think I somehow checked a lot of the boxes that they were looking for. But it comes down to, I think, a few things, and really what I emphasize in conversations with junior folks is kind of the latter. But first and foremost is, like, you have to be a competitive candidate, right? Whether it's like GPA, internships, whatever. I think second is expressing interest, right, through relevant internships, but also involvement with clubs on the campus. So for me, for example, right, like, I maintained really good grades. I was already in the business school program. I coming out of my freshman internship, I actually joined the largest finance club on campus, and I pitched to the president of the club back then on this idea of, hey, I got so much out of my freshman internship. I think it'd be great if we can give this to other people. So I want to basically set up this program called Underclassmen Representative Program, where I and this other guy that I recruited, we were calling local firms, asking them to open up internship roles that we just basically blast out to our kind of club listserv for them to apply, so that freshmen and sophomores who are having a hard time getting internships on their own can get those roles. And through that, I got to meet a ton of upperclassmen who already had full-time offers, right, coming from their banking summer internships. So the third thing that I was going to emphasize was the networking, right? I think a lot of times you got to do the cold calls, blah, blah, blah. But really, like, when I talk to students, I always tell them, like, go talk to your upperclassmen. They've already done it. They have the network. They know the guys and girls that are going to be the ones responsible for hiring interns. And they may be also influencing, like, the decision makers decision process too. So basically, like, the reason why I ended up at Barclays was the president of the finance club that I mentioned. He interned at Barclays, so he basically put me through the accelerated recruiting timeline, and I got to go through the Barclays Super Day before all the other major banks interviewed for UNC students. And I got the offer, and you know how these things are, like it's exploding offer, right? So I just kind of took it, knowing that Barclays is a good platform. I like the people, and I'm gonna have the support. So that's kind of how it all worked out for me. But I always, tell the students to really think about like people closest to you. You don't need to be calling the VP or the managing director of Goldman Sachs to get hired.
Yeah, I think that one thing that stands out about how you got to this point is a level of proactiveness. But I think networking is always an abstract term, especially to young people, right? Because it means so many things, right? I think. Can you just talk about networking at that age? And you mentioned going to clubs as one thing, but what is an effective networking strategy?
I think at that age, you have to understand that you have nothing to offer besides making the other person feel good about contributing their time and wisdom. So I always walked into a networking call at that age with the idea of how can I learn the most from that person's individual experience. And when I say that, it's not just necessarily, hey, like, how was your experience at Goldman Sachs, at Barclays, whatever, but actually getting to know, like, hey, what was your path? Like, where'd you grow up? Like, did you know about investment banking through family, or did you also kind of find out about it? Like, what was your expectation going in? How different is it now that you're in it? So really just trying to be curious about how they got there, and how they feel about it, to give them the opportunity to basically coach me, right? As somebody who doesn't know any better, who is curious and, like you said, proactive enough to learn more. And really, I'm just basically asking them for wisdom. And for better or worse, like most people like to talk about themselves, right? And I think students forget that a lot of people don't like to talk about their jobs, but a lot of people like to talk about their own life. Yeah. So really trying to integrate like the life story with their careers. And frankly, like, we hear a lot about how tough the banking world is. So I also had some reservations, but, really trying to understand, hey, this is right for me as a person, right? So I think that's the approach that I somehow picked up and would recommend. And I think more practically, like I always tell this to students, get your pitch down. Like, tell me about yourself is always going to be the first question that they ask. Like, have something super strong and crisp, that's under a minute and a half, and know exactly 2 to 3 questions that are specifically tailored to the person that you're talking to. So those two things you just gotta, be really good at.
Yeah. And then what was your first banking rollout like, when you went to get a full-time role? Can you just talk about, maybe what you learned at the internship, how that benefited you getting a full-time role, and then, those reservations that we all hear about the workload and how it affects your personal life. What was that experience like for you, and how did it affect your, what you want to do going forward in the industry?
Yeah, so I ended up interning at Barclays in their healthcare group. So, I think they, if I were to be in the kind of full-timer shoes, they viewed me as that guy from the state school that was super proactive, had relevant internships that could kind of get ramped up really quickly. So because of that, I think they felt comfortable staffing me on some of the more quantitative projects, right? In addition to like the grunt work of comps, spreading comps, and whatever presentation work, which everyone has to do. But really, I think it came down to, I don't know, like 2 to 3 analysts that I worked with who appreciated that like my work was always accurate, and that I was technically inclined to not bust the model. I may not be 100% correct, but it's almost there. So really trying to save them time. Like I always thought about it as, hey, how can I help this analyst associate go home an hour earlier? That was kind of my goal, thinking about it. And I think they appreciated that, and like I wasn't so obsessed with like prestige or whatever. They're always the interns that are asking like, hey, can I get staff on that mega deal, right? Like I want to put it on my resume. Like I wasn't too concerned about that. So I think they appreciated my general attitude as well. And I think you asked about like the lifestyle of it. I mean, look, I think being an banking intern is super fun. Like you're making a good amount of money living in the city. I was roommates in the city with my college roommates, college roommate as well, who was also doing banking. So it was a blast. So for me, like I had zero reservations about coming back to banking full time. Separate story, how different full time is to internships, but um, but then the other thing that I realized is like as much as I think I can do the banking job well, I realized that like I don't have healthcare expertise. So like I want to say 80% of my intern class in the healthcare group were pre-meds. I wasn't. So everything that was whether like pharma, biotech just went right over my head. So I knew I had to switch groups. So full time, I ended up joining Barclays in their tech media telecom group, which was more intuitive to me.
Yeah, and I think one thing you noted there that I always tell the junior people on our team is like people don't want to do more work for the most part, right? So if you're offering to take things off of their plate and they believe that you can do it at a high enough level where it's a net benefit to them, like they're going to give you work, right? Like you don't have to wait for things to come to you. When you look at the people that you want to impress, the senior people to you, find out what they want to do least and get good at it, right? And take that off their plate. And then find the thing they want to do the next least and get good at that and take that off the plate. And all of a sudden, like, you can kind of get responsibility that you maybe wouldn't have been given otherwise.
Yeah, earning trust. I think that's what you're talking about, like earning trust and building your way up. Like I remember, like one of the things that analysts always had to do was staying up until the drivers confirmed the books were delivered, right? And depending on where the MDs lived, like it could be an hour car ride. So like volunteering and saying, hey, I can stay up. Like I'll share my number with the driver, and like I'll text you when they get it. So when you wake up, you know that it's been delivered. If not, like I guess I'll freak out and figure something out. But just volunteering and saying, hey, like I'm gonna get home at 3 a.m. just like you, but I'm gonna stay up another hour until 4 to get the delivery confirmation, so you can get an extra hour of sleep, right? I think things like small things like that go a way longer way than like, hey, like I'm gonna build this model for your mega deal that you're working on, whatever. Like everyone's asking for that.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well, right? Find kind of the points of least resistance, and maybe it's not always the sexiest work or the work that everyone wants, but it all adds value and it all makes someone else's life easier.
Yeah, exactly.
So that transition to private equity, right? And I think that's always an interesting point, right? And it's always contentious. Banks don't really want people being recruited the minute they get a job, but for a lot of people, that's their goal, is to get to the buy side. So maybe you could talk about why that was attractive to you, how you best positioned yourself, and what that transition looked like.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to go into private equity. Banking was a stepping stone that everyone told me that I had to make. And so I knew I was going to participate on the on-cycle recruiting process. And I think every bank and every group is different in terms of how supportive they are about recruiting. But at least my experience at Barclays was they were super supportive, and they actually thought it was a good thing for the analysts and the reputation of the group to send each class to the best PE firms. That then kind of signals to the incomings that this is a good group to join. So it's like a talent attracting talent scheme as well. So in my group, in the TMT group, the staffer when I joined was actually an ex-private equity guy who boomeranged back into banking. He had his own perspective about PE versus IB, but he knew the game, right? He knew what it took. He knew the process, and he was very transparent that, hey, new incoming analyst class, if you're interested in recruiting, be open about it. Don't bullshit me into saying that you're going to the dentist. Just tell me. So I think I got lucky in that regard, that the group was supportive and the staff was supportive. And look, one of the other reasons why I ended up joining the tech media telecom group was because the finance club president that I mentioned was actually a year ahead of me in that group. And he had a really amazing reputation. And so I knew that I could kind of get his help in navigating all the politics of getting the right staffings, recruiting, and all of that. And so what actually ended up happening was, like, I went to the staffer earlier in my kind of banking, my first year banking. I joined this group. I'm going to recruit. Please consider me for good staffings, blah, blah, blah. And the finance club president, his name is Andrew. Andrew was working a lot with this, superstar VP who basically had all the M&A mandates. And when a sell side mandate came up, Andrew basically pitched that, like, I be on it. And the staffer also pitched that I be on it. And so I got, staffed on a real sell side M&A deal after, I guess, about a month or two into the desk. And that was tremendous because I had real kind of experience of, like, doing M&A. So I had real things to talk about during on cycle, which happened about 5-ish months onto the desk. I think it was January the following year. And so, I think that helped me kind of bulk up my resume, talk about a real deal, and frankly, prep hard enough on the deal to impress some of the, people that ended up hiring me at Providence. So yeah, again, like, I think in retrospect, all these things, like, make sense, but I think at the heat of the moment, I was just kind of leaning on people that were going to be helpful and, really trying to talk to them about my career goals.
Yeah, very cool. And again, I think that proactive nature kind of keeps reoccurring, right? And to me, I think one of the things that's really interesting about going into private equity from banking, right, is it's a very different experience. And there's a lot more people management when you're dealing with kind of companies and who owns them, right? So maybe you could just talk about the skill set that made you really good in banking and how that had to change a little bit or alter, or you had to make up for things or learn new things when you got to private equity.
Yeah. So I think the skill sets that I developed in banking that people appreciated were, the technical skills. Like, can you model fast? Can you model this complex deal structure without any errors? And can you translate that onto pages really well? Or if you're running a sales side, like, can you do all these, fancy analyses really fast and really well and be able to answer questions if, buyers have questions, right? So a lot of the technical kind of aspect of it was definitely the focus of my growth my first year. I think towards the second year, right, I started to get staffed as an associate a little bit here and there, working directly with VPs or MDs, and I think they started to appreciate some of the kind of the story making aspect of it, of like, hey, how can you put together a pitch for a client? Like, what do you say, whatever. Like, that was just fun to me, but it wasn't like what got me a good bonus, for example, right? It was the ability to just grind. So that was like the core skill set, and I think that built a super good foundation, because when you get to PE, I think being a first year private equity associate is like the hardest job. It is the hardest job, because not only are you doing the grunt work of all the analysis, all the presentation building, whatever, and the expectation is everything, right? Like, whatever the VPs know, you should know. Whatever the MDs, the partners know, you should know. And they will lean on you to ask, hey, what do you think about like this bullet point on page 58 of the QE? I'm like, my man, I haven't even gotten there. Like, I will read that tonight at 2 a.m. in the morning. But like that's the expectation, right? Like everyone knows everything, um, and in some ways, like you have to do the work, think critically, and manage everyone else, like making sure that nothing falls through the cracks, right? Um, and so I think my first year transition period was like, if I can't model in my sleep, like I'm already toast. Like the modeling work, all that stuff was like, that's something that I did like, late at night, whatever, just blasting music on my iPhone, right? Natural stuff. And then everything else, I had to do the modeling stuff and quantitative stuff so efficiently so that I could create time to do the thinking, which was a harder part of ramping up into the private equity role.
I think one of the things that you like touched on was the word narrative there. And one of the things that I've gotten, over the last 7 or 8 years as I've gotten more involved in this world is when I was younger, I thought once you got to or more naive, I thought once businesses got to a certain size that everything was based off of numbers. But I think the more you learn, it's like everything's based off of narrative, and numbers
Yeah.
support narrative, data supports a narrative. Um, and the most difficult part is it's not one narrative, right? Every negotiation point, every piece of the deal has its own narrative, and it has different people that you have to tell that to in a different way to get everyone aligned. And that's one of the things that's always been really impressive to me. It's like how well people can craft the narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I do think something that I did not appreciate about private equity, like recruiting into it, is how different each private equity firm is in terms of how they think about industries and think about opportunities. And, I think every PE firm and every kind of group inside the PE firms have their ways of thinking, their biases, right? And so part of the job as an associate is like, what are they looking for? Like what is good in their eyes, right? And part of it is like, you start to get trained the XYZ firm way of investing, right? For example, for me, like I think I got really well trained on Providence way of investing, and thankfully, like I subscribe to a lot of the things that they believe in, whereas like other firms may be much more, I don't know, value oriented or whatever, that you just have to learn to do the job. But then as you think about the long term career aspect of it, is like how much of it do you actually believe in versus like how to do, right? As you build investment judgment on your career, especially as you think about like, VP and beyond, where you're now crafting the thesis and you're now talking to the partners and the CEOs, whoever, to sell them on the vision, right? You kind of have to believe in it, right? You kind of, that's your job at that point.
Yep.
So I think part of that was like during the 3 years that I spent at Providence, I had to think about like, oh, what do I like, what I don't like, and kind of calibrate from there.
Yeah, and I think that's like when you get really good at selling the vision, it's an incredibly important thing because throughout these deals, throughout the deal making process, the deal execution, and the ownership, and even in the exiting, there's so many different parties that have different viewpoints and different goals that you have to align under one endpoint, one vision.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a difference between a single digit growth underwriting versus double digit growth underwriting, right? Difference between entry and exit multiple parity versus higher exit or lower exit. Like it's all I think just built on the firm and the individual deal teams experiences and biases.
Yeah, and you obviously had this great working experience at these really incredible firms that have been just have amazing reputations within the industry. And after all that hard work to get there, you ended up deciding to leave. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about what led to that decision and how you made it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll give the long story, but feel free to interrupt me. So I spent 3 years at Providence. My first year was, I mean, I was just working. I didn't have time to think. My second year was slightly better. But I honestly was so overwhelmed even then that I started questioning, hey, like, can I do this, right? Just like sheer work of like, can I do this forever? And then my third year there as a senior associate, I got to understand that like, oh, I started working with first year associates. So I had a little bit more leverage, and I started kind of seeing how the investment process works. So I got a little bit more, I guess, insight into the next level. Um, but even then, this was 2021. Coming out of Providence, I thought about, hey, is this kind of the right time to pivot? So I actually ended up talking to portfolio companies about operating roles. I even talked to a business owner about potentially joining him as, a head of finance, CFO role, or even like startup roles. But the world has it that the first offer that I got was a private equity offer, and those are exploding offers, and I thought about it, and this was during COVID, and I thought, why not kind of keep doing it for a few more years to see what it's like as a mid-level. And so that's kind of how I kind of transitioned from Providence Equity Partners to Tailwind Capital. And I think Tailwind was a good experience in terms of it was a lower middle market, smaller firm. Definitely less infrastructure, but that also meant like a lot of room to explore different things and take on a lot of different responsibilities and hats. So I learned a ton. But I would say that, and I would think that a lot of my peers and even senior folks in the industry might resonate with this, which is that private equity is getting more and more competitive, right? Many of the deals that we were looking at in the upper middle market were all banked. Even in the lower middle market, a lot of bank deals still. So one thing that I realized was it's super competitive. So then how do you actually create value in that scenario, right? It's operating chops and industry knowledge. And I have sometimes disagreements with some of my peers who are still in the industry, which is I tend to think that unless I have some level of operating experience, I will never be able to fully utilize some other operators' network expertise, support. Whereas some others might disagree and say that, hey, there's actually a lot of value in sitting on boards and having working with a ton of different operators and kind of seeing it at a level above the ground level, right? But I was really focused on getting the ground level experience, and frankly, also, I think private equity is a great career, but if that was the only thing that I've ever done in my entire life as my career, I would have given myself like a B+ for, having a good career, but not really exploring, right? Outside of that. So I just thought that this is a good time to explore some of the operating itch that I had. And I can talk about like some of the decision points that led me to what I'm doing now. But for me, it was really, hey, I wanted to add an operating experience on top of my investment career, and net, those combined will ultimately help me become a better investor, better operator, whichever path that I end up deciding on.
Yeah, and I think that's always one of like the quintessential debates within this, right? It's like how much can you really add value without being a boots on the ground, knowledgeable operator? And I think there is like that answer to me varies depending on the scale of the business, right? I think the smaller that you get, the more operating expertise helps. Um,
Yeah.
and part of that is there's less infrastructure, there's less support, there's less expertise at a smaller company than there is at a large company that's achieved scale already. But I really commend that, right? Because I think it's one thing to say I value learning about being an operator and being boots on the ground. It's another to make the jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just like, what do you want to do, right? I already made my peace that I don't want to work at a mega fund. I don't want to work in the upper middle market. And so, like you said, like, the skill set I think has the tremendous value is operating chops in the network. that you can bring to the table in the lower middle market and below. And so in whatever I do, even if I end up going back to investing roles, I just thought it was a good thing to at least explore and have a sense of what it takes. So when I actually talk to founders, right, we would always talk to a lot of founders. And of course, I have my pitch down as an investor, but I think it'd be a different conversation to tell them, hey, I've at least tried, or I've achieved some level of success. Let's talk about it from not only as an investor operator relationship, but also as like a peer-to-peer conversation, because I have some level of real boots on the ground experience.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So maybe you could just talk about what that actually looked like for you, how you got to your path and where you are today.
Yeah. So I think coming out of PE, pivoting from Tailwind, I thought I was going to be doing self-funded research. So basically buying companies, small companies, relatively small companies, with my own capital and running it. But as you know, it's super difficult, and it's I think something that I did not appreciate was like its implications on my life as well, like my family's life, right? Like it has implications on where we live, how we live, blah blah blah. But that was initial kind of thinking, and I was going towards that route, and as kind of in parallel, I started writing the newsletter Road to Carry, because it kind of relates to my background as well. Like growing up as an immigrant that kind of stumbled into private equity, like people outside of my immediate network of private equity don't know what it is, and that always kind of didn't sit well with me. And so I wanted to write and bring transparency about private equity for the folks that may or may not realize they're part of the game, right? So that's how Road to Carry got started.
If you live in this economy, you're kind of part of the game.
Yeah, exactly. You're probably part of the game. Like you probably don't know, but you're part of the game. And so that's why I started a newsletter, really not thinking that's just something that I may, dedicate more time than a few hours a week. But fast forward a few months, people seem to like what it's about, the content, and it's really growing into a really powerful community of legitimate investors in the industry. Like we have investment professionals across all the top firms, middle market firms you could probably name, and even private equity backed executives, right? So it's evolved into a community that I just never thought it would be when I started writing. And now I see an opportunity to actually get an operating experience by building Road to Carry as a private equity focused digital media education. And I think there could be some services component to it as I think about kind of creating an empire around it. And really kind of hone in on that as opposed to trying to buy somebody else's business and potentially relocate to somewhere that may not fit me as a person.
Yeah, I love the name too, because like that is the carrot that everyone chases, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm working on a few ideas that like directly translates to like your own path to getting carry, and we can talk about it. But some of the items some of the projects that I'm cooking in the background is really about helping investment professionals like myself a few months ago like take the leap and really get his or her own path into carry outside of the traditional PE career ladder.
Well, and one of the reasons that I like it as well is there's a huge kind of surgence in the social media community, especially, and just through various influencers and society about buying a business, right? Buying a small business and that being a stable way to produce income. And I think anyone knows that buying any business, especially a small business, is not a stable anything. So you provide a lot of insight into how difficult it really is to grow businesses, to operate the stress, the situations, and the skills and abilities that you need to do it are not exactly run of the mill.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's great that this concept of like entrepreneurship through acquisition, right? ETA, has been so prevalent, and like I think in general, I'm supportive of that idea. But like you said, people definitely underappreciate how much work it is, how much commitment it is, and how much risk it is. And frankly, I've thought about like what is kind of my core audience and what do I want to do with them. My core audience is the PE folks, and which is different from I think some of the main street, buy a small business and run it kind of stuff, that I think social media influencers talk about. But at the same time, like I want to help both the PE folks and non-PE folks to think big and learn from the kind of the big established guys and learn what they're doing and how they're making, hundreds of millions of value, equity value over a few years. And like some of that playbook is transferable in the lower middle market as well, in my opinion. But not a lot of people know about it or are capable of it. But part of the mission for Road to Carry is kind of bringing that transparency, education, and the network to really aim for the big things.
Yeah, I think that's always like in any business, right? You want to be able to operate with the expertise, the processes, and the infrastructure of the best. And the traditional private equity model has always been to grow your assets under management. And that leads to oftentimes some of the best investors being the people that just manage the most money.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think outside looking in, it's hard to tell, but a lot of private equity is just smart and driven folks running around and making it work.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think there is a very high bar for aptitude within the industry where once you get to a certain level, there's a very low chance that you're not highly competent. You can't really kind of just float your way up to being a significant investor. And that's one of the things the industry has created with this process to get into it. It's like once you go through those rigors, you usually clear our level of kind of competence. But that's also what's made it so selective, right? It's an industry that is kind of an echo chamber where a lot of the people do go to the same schools, have similar viewpoints, get trained in the same way. So there's not a lot of new outside views that come into the industry.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think I think when I think about aptitude, like there are probably multiple traits. I think private equity people tend to spike in certain traits, right? They're very quantitative and analytical. I would say generally high in EQ as well. But there are also other things, right? Like you hear about the issues in banking, about the kind of expectations and some of the working relationships that also happen in private equity, but it's not as public because these are some of the smaller firms as opposed to like when Wall Street Journal writes about Goldman Sachs, everyone like like Wall Street. But there's a lot of I think good character traits, but also other aspects of just being a businessman. Sometimes it's not as holistic as I think as it could be.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but one of my first businesses out of college is we opened a small hot dog restaurant, and I was lucky enough there that I had a partner then, Bill Garland, who was a just fantastic restaurant operator, really a fantastic business operator in general. Like I was very lucky to kind of be involved with someone like that at that early stage in my career. But one of the things he really taught me was like the value in managing and motivating a team that you're not paying very well, right? When everyone is making $250,000 a year, it's a very different kind of people have different levels of motivation, but when you often get boots on the ground in these smaller businesses, it's a very difficult thing to align the team to a vision, to get them to people to buy in when they don't necessarily have that income security.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it in terms of like business maturity, right? Like, I mean, let's just call it like, EBITDA, right? I think I was really well trained in getting a business from 10 to getting them to $100 million of EBITDA, right? Just creating a ton of value in that range. I got some exposure in training about getting, business from 5 to 10, but from 0 to 1, like you don't learn that in banking or PE, right? So I do think it's a completely different skill set. I mean, there are definitely common traits that help across the board, but in terms of like what it takes to get something from the ground up to 1, and 1 to 5, and 5 to 10, and 10 to 100, whatever, I do think it's very different. And while I did not appreciate why there are so many different types of, like there's low middle market P, upper middle market, mega fund, whatever, all these labels, but I do think size is a reflection of, the difference in skill sets it takes to get to the next level.
I'd agree. I'd very much agree. And I think it's also like different people like different parts of that cycle.
Yeah.
I think people have different levels of pain tolerance, right?
Different levels of pain tolerance and creativity, like some people are actually like geniuses when it comes to like financial engineering, like some of the stuff that you don't even think about. I'm like, all right, I guess that's what you think about in your sleep.
Yeah, so I worked when I started, had partners at the sponsor. One of my partners was a guy named Louis Iaconetti, who was a former MD at Global Infrastructure Partners, and that was his job, right? Because infrastructure is so much more complicated financially. Because Lou would always say, if there's a management team, it's not infrastructure. And like when you're talking about generating returns in those scenarios, and when you're building a power plant or financing, a railway in Uruguay. The level of creativity and knowledge financially is so intense. But in the same sense, Lou would be the first to admit, if you had to put him in a management team meeting of a small business, that's not where he's going to excel.
Yeah. I think everyone has different strengths and weaknesses based on the careers that they've both built. And I think that's why it's so important to try to have some clarity around where you want to be long term, because everything compounds on top of whatever you've done, and you could eventually excel in something, make it to the top of it, only to realize that that's not what you want, right? Which should be a terrible place to be. I mean, I guess not terrible in the sense that you would have been successful, but people could accidentally build something great that they never intended, that I actually don't like.
Yeah. So when you think about people that are considering leaving the industry, or just exploring different paths, what's the advice that you would give them?
The advice that I would give them is, it's getting a little philosophical, but really, like, think about what made you get into private equity in the first place, and what is important to you now and in the future, right? Like for me, yes, like making money, good amount of money was good, but it didn't ultimately like bring me a lot of happiness. I'm not a big spender. Like I don't, I just go straight to my bank account. And so while it was like a feel good experience as a, junior professional in my 20s to kind of save up that, the savings, ultimately, I realized that, it's not going to be bringing me a ton of happiness, money itself, for the long term, right? But for somebody else, it could be the most important thing, right? And then something like, why is it important that you work hard, right? Everyone in finance works hard, but for what reason? Like, is it for stamp of approval from other people? Is it an internal stamp of approval? Is it actually just low self-esteem. Understanding all those things about, I think, your personality and you as a person, and thinking through what career makes sense for you and whether or not private equity, investment banking, hedge funds, whatever, can give you that in your current role, I think will help those people gain some clarity around what they can get from the job and what they can't get from the job. And what they can't get from the job is important enough, then I think they should explore other things, right? And when they explore other things, they should know what they're not getting from their current job. So their exploration should focus on those things that they're not currently getting from their current job and focus on those opportunities as opposed to the opportunities that are the most adjacent to the current role, which could be, I don't know, like PE-backed companies, head of M&A, right? But it could solve some of the things that you're not getting from your current PE role, maybe or maybe not. But having that clarity is going to help you decide what you want to do next.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful advice. And I guess to end, maybe you could just talk a little bit about Road to Carry, what you write about, where people can sign up, what your vision is there, and do as much self-promo as you can.
Yeah, I guess I should have prepped for this. So where you can go sign up is www.penewsletter.com. And basically the content is twofold. One is I write case studies about specific deals. So private equity firm X invested in industry Y through a portfolio company Z. And these are all the reasons why they were successful. This is what I assume their investment thesis was and why it's an attractive market. And so really I'm trying to educate people by living vicariously through a successful private equity deal, right? So you learn by doing, and the next best thing is you learn by doing it vicariously. And so there's an education component to that, which is the most important kind of mission, bringing transparency and fostering education in the ecosystem. But the second mission is I want to enable people to basically get their own path to carry, right? Road to carry. And so I am sharing deal flow, typically on the smaller side, to basically have people
Could you define
evaluate.
Smaller quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now I've shared deals anything from $500,000 of EBITDA to $5 million plus of EBITDA. But I think what I'm trying to focus on is probably, I don't know, $1.5 million EBITDA or less, where either a searcher or independent sponsor could have a reasonable shot at goal, as opposed to, if it's a $5-10 million EBITDA deal, it's probably going to go to a private equity firm,
It's
right?
so hard to compete for that as a...
Yeah, exactly. And so what I'm building right now is I'm building an audience of aspiring and current investors. I'm building an audience of brokers who's going to bring the deal flow. And I don't know when this is going to go up, but I'm also building out an audience of investors and limited partners that want to deploy capital behind these talented people. And so I'm really trying to create this ecosystem where if you want to do private equity, whether as part of a traditional PE firm or on your own, you come to Road to Carry to learn about it, network, and get deals done. So that's the long-term goal, and I'm building towards it, starting with a newsletter, but there's a lot more going on in the background. But you can check it out by penewsletter.com.
No, that's awesome. Well, look, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to subscribing and reading those newsletters.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Thomas. It's a great conversation.